As usual, California is burning again. Nothing new there. What I am talking about is the Palisades fire. It has taken a while for me to make this video. So as you already know, the Palisades fire was in a heavy urban area threatening thousands of people. And they ran out of water. Really? You can't make this stuff up. I need to know this. Why do I always see people on their roofs wetting down their houses? Seriously? That really doesn't work. The environment is extremely dry. First, you have heated air approaching your house. This means all the water is doing is evaporating. Then the fire finally reaches the house. With superheated air, you have to make a hasty retreat out of there. And the fire finally wins and takes the house. And all that person did was waste time and lower the water pressure in the water system. Doesn't make any sense to me. Also in the same news reports, I constantly see people running around with their garden hoses without nozzles. I see these people with their fingers pressed up against the end of the hose spraying the water wildly. That doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Do Californians have something against garden hose nozzles? There are different types of nozzles out in the market. You have choices. I know that is a little capitalistic, but you can choose. Seriously. I'm sure if you have a 3D printer, you can probably make your own nozzle. Although this is California, and I try not to put reason to these questions, please someone let me know in the comments. I really need to know this. So, let's look at the failures of what happened in Hippy Dippy Land, and let's see if the Sunshine Children of the Corn can come up with new ideas to burn their state down. No, I'm kidding. But we are going to look at the failures and work on new ideas to help fortify the homes and buildings, and hopefully a redundant system so running out of water doesn't happen again. For a state that burns every year, it seems like they're always ill-prepared. Every year the news is filled with stories of people having to evacuate because their house is on fire. But this particular area hasn't burned in 50 years, which means there's 35 to 45 years of brush buildup, whether it is deadfall or overgrown shrubbery and grass. It doesn't matter. Either way, the bottom line is fuel. Now, this really isn't a state. I will call it a matchstick waiting to be struck. Whether it is from lightning, power lines coming down, homeless encampments, or just plain stupidity, you have people who design neighborhoods on these steep hillsides. They spend more time figuring out how to keep the houses from sliding off the hillsides than they do designing a robust infrastructure to keep the residents safe. They're more interested in how to make a house float over the hill for the perfect view than how we're going to get these people out of the neighborhood. Some of these locations are on narrow winding or switchback roadways, one way in or out, and you got people living on a wing and a prayer. Common sense says, nope, not a good idea. Now the question is, does the state do enough to prepare for these fires that strike every year? In some areas, they excel at it, and other areas they don't. How robust is their plan to respond to these fires? Obviously, every emergency is a fluid scene. You can't have concrete plans. You need the boots on the ground to be able to adapt to the scene. These firefighters on the fire ground had an impossible task to overcome. The incident commander also had an impossible task. The blame falls on the politicians and the leaders at the top. They are the decision makers. They are the purse string holders. And a small amount of the blame falls on the homeowners. What I mean is the brush buildup around their homes. I know in Hippy Dippy Land, the Sunshine Children of the Corn believe the earth is the living mother and we can't kill parts of the living mother. Well, this is America, and you have that choice. Personally, myself, if it came to my house, I would mow living mother down around my house. That is my opinion. Now in Hippy Dippy Land, besides politicians and leaders, there are also commissions for everything. Most of you are asking, what is a commission? Well, a commission is a group of unelected individuals. Some are professionals in certain positions. Other people on this commission, well, they just want the power trip. Anyway, here in Hippy Dippy Land, there is a commission for everything, and they are there to protect certain things. It could be a certain grass species they deem endangered, so you can't build a road here because of that endangered grass. Here in the Sunshine Children of the Corn, if they could create a commission on how much carbon dioxide you exhale, they would do it. Now on a serious point, these commissions were set up with good intentions, but over time they were perverted into some bureaucratic swamp monster, making it almost impossible to do anything in that state. The commissions decides what happens in and around the state, in various areas including land management, construction, and even the ocean. For an example, they have a perverted idea in the wildland. If it falls to the ground, then leave it on the ground. The land will consume it. In a perfect world, that would be fine. But here in reality, that is a bad idea. That is called fuel load or firewood. The other brainiac idea they had was California ended harvesting trees for the market. In my humble opinion, that was not a smart idea for several reasons. These logging companies used to create and maintain roads inside these forests. These logging roads offered a small fire break and vehicle access deep in the forest to fight these fires. Now, decades later, some of these roads are overgrown and in disrepair due to these commissions, the sunshine children of the corn, and the politicians. We kept hearing clean up the forest floor. We obviously know you can't physically clean the forest floor. It's dirt. So for the sunshine children of the corn, it was a metaphor to cut down all the dead brush and deadfall on the ground. Oh, and to cut the brush down too, you can't forget that also. You got dead trees laying on the ground providing homes for all the little woodland creatures so they can frolic through the burning wildland. After the forest fires in California, these dead trees are starting to rot from the inside out. They can also harbor fire for months after the initial fire has been extinguished. The state needs to start harvesting trees for the timber industry. And these logging companies, as they harvest the trees, can also help in cleaning up the forest floor. They have specially trained people called arborists that can go in and identify trees that can be harvested and note areas that can be cleaned up at the same time. Now, another wonderful thing California was gifted with, besides hippy dippies and the sunshine children of the corn, I'm kidding. Calm down. The present that keeps giving is the Santa Ana winds. Very warm and dry winds that blow off the desert and can gust up to 40 to 100 miles per hour. It's a perfect disaster forming with horrible HOAs at the helm. Another massive screw-up, the Pacific Palisades Reservoir. This reservoir is supposed to hold 117 million gallons of water. That's enough to fill up 450 Olympic-sized swimming pools. It was shut down and drained for repairs. The reason given? There was a tear in the floating cover over the reservoir. That allowed debris and contaminants to get into the water. Let's stop and think about this for a second. You put a floating cover over a small lake. What do you think is going to happen? It happened once. It happened again. Do you think having a floating cover is a good idea? I'm just saying. The LA fire chief said that her department was never notified that the reservoir was being drained. As usual, the right hand has no idea what the left hand is doing. At some point during the firefight of the Palisades fire, they ran out of water due to the reservoir being empty. That means all they had was what was in the water pipes in and around the Palisades. And with so many fire engines hooked up to the system, that maxed out pretty quickly. Then you had homeowners squirting water out of their garden hoses. That doesn't help. Then what houses burned down? They were wasting water because the water pipes burned through. And you multiply that by how many homes caught fire. So, what can the city or the state do in the future to prevent future damage to this floating cover? Could they actually invest in creating a hard cover like a dome over the reservoir? It doesn't need to be very high. It just needs to protect the reservoir. Then you can keep that floating cover in the reservoir as an additional protection. It also makes me wonder, if they drained this reservoir because of possible water contamination, are they treating the water before sending it to people's homes? It makes me wonder. In my humble opinion, this explains a lot on why there are so many hippy dippies and the sunshine children of the corn out there. I'm just kidding. Go and sniff Mother Earth. It will calm you down. There was another major issue. When the new LA yearly budget began, the LA Fire was the largest budget cut for that year. LA Fire had to cut $17.5 million, a major hit to their bottom line. The chief had to make a tough decision, where to cut from. Her budget, the choices are cutting from operations. This means closing fire stations and cutting frontline service. You can't do that. Then you have administration. You can shave a little from there, but not enough to make a difference. Then you have inspections and investigations. You can't cut from there. This will cause major issues as inspections goes through new construction. Renovations of commercial buildings also inspects current commercial buildings. Then you have investigations, specially trained personnel to determine if a fire was arson or accidental. You have to understand the LAFD has 3 areas that they cut. They have training, they have the current rostered personnel, and then they have the mechanics. The training you can't take away from that. That is there for new recruits and current rostered personnel with continuing education. So they cut the people that keep the fire apparatus on the street. That was where the department cut heavily. The question is, was she informed on how many apparatus were out of service for repairs and/or inspections? Because when the fire broke out, there was 100 fire apparatus out of service. That's 15% of the fleet. Now, some of these vehicles could be medical. They could be administrative-type vehicles, but others, maybe they were actual fire trucks and engines that couldn't respond to any emergencies. Even though the city knew these budget cuts were coming, they decided that it would be a smart idea to create and implement DEI programs. Now, when you look at the brass tacks of everything, no one can argue that these programs cost millions of dollars to create and implement from the ground up. In such fiscal desperation, why would these politicians and leaders think that it was a smart idea to create such fiscal suffering inside different departments, especially when you're spending over $2 million on a battery-powered fire engine? That's right. The LA Fire Department purchased a $2 million, yes, million, $2 million battery-powered fire engine. In my humble opinion, that is a very poor fiscal decision. All this was to grandstand with an overpriced RC toy